What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Hatoraid Live, the Hatoraid Hour podcast. I'm your host, Jordan, aka Hatoraid Cowboy, and we've got a very special guest, first timer today, but we also have a returning guest. So we've got Shane. What's up, Shane?
What's up, guys?
Shane just fresh off of a 9 hour marathon for Andor
Yeah,
season two.
9 hours. I had to catch up.
And then we got our special guest, first timer, a good friend, Anthony Grimani. What's going on, Anthony?
It's a great day, man. Great day, and
Good
I'm
to
and
see
I'm
you.
drinking some coffee.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
Anthony, appreciate you getting over here in time. I know you were just sitting in some traffic, so yeah. So welcome everybody. We are going to be talking to Anthony Grimani. So we wanted to get Anthony on here to talk about speaker placement and acoustic treatment. So Anthony's got some slides that he's going to show us. We're basically going to let him take the reins and explain that to us. I know me and Shane are we're no newbies to that, but for anybody watching who's maybe is thinking about getting a home theater, building a home theater, maybe you don't know where to start with speaker placement. Acoustic treatment is probably one of the first things that you would want to invest in. I'll let Anthony talk about that, and then if you guys have any questions, super chats, make sure you guys leave them in the comments, and we will either address them during or at the very end. So, Anthony, you want to give yourself a brief introduction?
Uh, yeah. Hey, this is Anthony. This is Anthony. Nice to meet you. No, I I do these, and I always say, dude, if I started to talk about all the things, it'd be here for days. I'll just say the simple part is I've been doing this, loving this, enjoying this for over 40 years. Um, And you go, there's no way, you're not that old. It's like I'm older than you think. And also, I started kind of young, actually. I was lucky enough to be born into a family where my mom was a professional opera singer and my dad was an engineer that focused on a lot on audio and music. So they actually met at the radio and TV station, which is really cute. And so been doing this for a while. I have a degree in electrical engineering. I my first real job out of college was working at Dolby Labs in the technology licensing division, and so I designed microchips for noise reduction for cassette decks. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then got very involved in the surround sound technology program as a great step forward for what Dolby could be doing in the consumer space, and worked there for a number of years. And then I was hired by Lucasfilm to start the home THX program and did that for about 10 years. Worked on the design of hundreds and hundreds of different home cinema products, home theater products. And about 25 years ago this year, I decided to start my own company doing acoustic design and optical design to an extent of rooms for home theater applications, private screening rooms, recording studios, all kinds of different environments where sound and picture are played. So that's what I do. Now, along the way, so I started a company that is a consulting firm. We I like to joke that we produce plan sets. We produce more than that, but at the end, the outcome is a 25 page to 150 page plan set that everybody involved in the construction of a recording studio, a production facility, or a home theater are following, that describes here's how you build the walls, the ceiling and floor, here's where you put the acoustic treatments, here's where you put the speakers, here's the kind of speakers you do. Ultimately, it's all expressed as a big stack of plans. Along the way, one spinoff was the idea of making and selling essentially a new generation of acoustical treatments, stuff that's more like just prettier, better priced, easier to deal with, sold as a package. So you'd go, okay, I have a room, it's 300 square feet. What do I need? Well, here's the package you need for that. So it's a little easier to deal with. So that spinoff is called Sonatus. Another spinoff later was actually launching a new generation of loudspeakers called Grimani Systems. Jordan, you've heard those at CEDIA
Yep.
last year and maybe the year before also. And they're quite novel. We
Hmm.
won't have time to get into that today, but the way they're thought about, the way they're built, the way they're powered, really goes quite a few steps ahead of the state of the art, which basically means that a smaller speaker will play louder than you think they would, The way they distribute sound in a room is much smoother. Everything just works better. It's more immersive, plays louder, is more dynamic than the current state of the art. So that is what keeps me busy when I'm not doing other fun things.
Awesome. Now, before we get into the acoustics and speaker placement, I did want to talk to you just a few minutes about that, because I know when I interviewed you at CD a couple years ago, you mentioned that you helped pioneer some of the home THX stuff. So can you tell us about like the products or what it is that you helped develop? Because that's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah. So when I started at Home THX in 1990, there were essentially no products. It was an idea. It's like, we've been doing this thing in the movie theaters for a while, and we want to take some of the concepts into essentially into the home cinema area. The home cinema, the term didn't even exist, but basically into the residential space. And so first step was to figure out essentially what are the technologies going to be. So a guy called Tom Holman, the TH of THX, came up with the core technologies that say, if you design speakers this way and you place them this way in a room and you feed them with a surround decoder that's got this post-processing series, and everything is built to this certain level of quality, and you tune it this particular way, when you sit down in this room, you're actually going to hear the same thing that the sound director heard in the production space where the original film soundtrack was mixed. And I don't know, let me see if I have a slide that illustrates that concept. I'll find one in a second. It's pretty visceral and visual. So the idea of Home THX was it's not an encoding or decoding scheme. It's not competing with what Dolby does. It's the idea here. I'm gonna try to put this on my screen. Hold on one second. So there it is. Can I share this screen? Share screen, push this button, go here, go there, entire screen. There it is. So share. Can you confirm that you can see this on screen? Great. So the work of THX was essentially launched originally by George Lucas, saying, hey, I hear and see something in the final production space, either in what's called the mix room or in what's known as the screening room. I see and hear something over here, and then when I go to the movie theaters out there, it sounds nothing like and looks nothing like what I saw that I intended for audiences to see and hear. What's up with that? And he hired a guy called Tom Holman, who was a well-known audio engineer and also had worked in video. He actually started early in his career working with Henry Close on the early video displays and projectors. We're going back a long time here. So he hired Tom Holman to research, hey, why is it that when I go to this movie theater or that movie theater, the experience is not at all what I intended? And so Tom was like, well, because they're cheapskates, because they don't have the right gear. It's like, I don't want to know that. How do we fix it? So Tom spent a few years in research and figured out, okay, we need to launch a whole new set of speaker designs. We need to launch a new crossover for the speaker, sometimes known as the THX, the Tom Holman crossover.
Okay.
That's where that comes from.
What that stood for.
And it's also it's funny. The project of that box was called the Tom Holman crossover, and George saw it, goes like, wait, that's the same name as the first movie I did, THX 1138, when I was in college. So it was like, convergence of elements. It was like, this is cool. And so the idea at the time at Lucasfilm was, okay, let's just create this book of standards. It says, if you build a movie theater that's got this kind of speakers, this kind of acoustic, this kind of projector, this kind of screen, and it's all set up in this certain way. The surround speakers are here, all of these rule books, and you calibrate it this way, that will mean that movie theater will produce a picture and a sound that's similar to this, which is, I'd say, one of the world's preeminent screening rooms in a film studio. That's in Northern California, up the road from over here. At Skywalker Ranch. It's an amazing place to watch a movie. Unbelievably gorgeous, because the picture and sound are curated to the max. by top level scientists that just know what they do to produce good picture and sound. So that was the idea of THX originally. Was we made this book of rules, and we've also had to make this piece of hardware that nobody had to be able to drive the speakers. And if you use these speakers from either JBL or Electro Voice, or like there's a few different ones, and you assemble them this way and you put them this way in the room, you do all this stuff and it all works and you follow the rules, you'll get a stamp that says you're THX certified. Yes, you'll pay a little bit of licensing money for that. And the audience is listening, as the logo often says. The audience will know, hey, if I go into this room, I'm going to have a better experience.
Interesting.
So that was the idea. Now, how do you take that into here? How do you take the audio video experience that you have either in the screening room or the mix stage, as it's known, the dubbing stage, and how do you bring it into a smaller room in the residential space? Well, Holman went to work and said, okay, well, the original mix is fine to play in here, but it's always a little too bright and it's a little mushy sounding compared to this and this thing and this thing. And he came up with a bunch of solutions that says, if you make a speaker this way for the fronts and a speaker that way for the surrounds and a speaker that way for the subwoofer, and you power it with an amplifier that can do this, and you drive it from a surround decoder that's got these signal processing features that allow to translate the inherent differences between what you hear in a big stage and what you hear in a small room that's 300, 400 square feet. If you do all of that, you can sit in this room and, you can have a Academy Award winning sound producer, designer, director sit in this room, play her movie, and they would go, that's exactly what I heard and saw in the dubbing stage or in the main screening room at the studio. Okay. So in the case of THX, a basic surround decoder from a manufacturer would have a good quality surround decoder would have to have a series of signal processing features added to it. It would have to be built to a certain level of performance and quality before it could be certified. It got co-designed, it got tested, it got certified, and then it got put on the market. And I did that for several products, starting with a Lexicon CP3 was the first product out there, along with a product from Techniques.
Okay.
And then the list went on into many other manufacturers, all the way from high-end products from Krell all the way to things from Yamaha, like the whole range. And with the speakers had to have a certain directivity, a certain frequency response, a certain dispersion. All these different things had to be met. The subwoofers had to have a certain sound pressure level. The surround speakers had to have a certain dispersion. So all these different things that meant that when you put it all together, put it in the room, you go, wow, that sounds just like the dubbing stage.
Interesting. Fascinating. That's
Are these is the Stag Theater still THX certified, or is that not a thing anymore?
You could say that. The funny thing is, I don't know that it ever got, certified. I don't think anybody from management at THX wrote the actual certificate, because it's like, no, that's the reference environment. What we're trying to do is to make everything sound and look like that. What do you mean we have to certify that? And in fact, it would have been actually cool if, I may be wrong, come to think of it, I think at the entrance of the Stag Theater's projection room, I think there was a THX logo. I don't remember, man. That was like more than a year ago. That's a good question, though.
Would you say that is THX still kind of a badge of quality in current speakers now, or does that not really matter anymore?
So in the case of consumer speakers, if you have a choice between a model and a brand that is THX certified and one that's not, what does that mean? Ultimately, what that means is the manufacturer has done their best effort to produce a good speaker, and an independent third party has verified it, has gone, I'm going to look at all the things you did. And as long as everything is done correctly, as long as the frequency response, the distortion, the dispersion, the impedance curves, all of the things that make a good speaker, which we're not going to talk about here. I have another completely other presentation on what makes a good speaker. All of those things are met, then you get you get a badge that says, "Yep, this independent third party has verified that it's good," kind of like a UL listing on a product to just prove that you built something that's safe. So I would say it's worth it. And there's a bunch of manufacturers that have gone through the process and gotten tested. And if a consumer has a choice of one or the other, chances are it's sort of like this one is certified by an independent third party to work well. Doesn't mean that the other one doesn't work just as well, but nobody's looked at it.
Do you think that most speakers nowadays would pass a THX certification?
No.
Wow.
Really?
There's still a lot of speakers with directivity that's quite uncontrolled, sound power response. It's not very smooth. Frequency responses that are not great. No, it wouldn't be.
Are there requirements as strict as they were back then, seeing as, we're seeing a lot of stuff like THX are making USB DACs for, computer products and stuff like that. Does that diminish
HDMI
the brand, you think?
So that's an interesting marketing question. I would say that within the speaker and amp business, there's now 3 tiers. There's the high end, which is Dominus, I'll be back. And then there's there's the 2 other levels, Ultra and
Select.
I forget the next one down.
Select.
Sorry, man.
Yeah.
Select. Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad you're here. I think I need a little more coffee. Hold on one second. So what those different badges largely mean is a sound pressure level capability. Yeah. So a Select speaker sounds great, doesn't play as loud as an Ultra, which sounds great, doesn't play as loud as a Dominus. And all of them have a radiation pattern, all of the things that make a good sounding speaker are there.
Would you think that your speakers would pass the THX certification?
I'm pretty sure they would. They're built to meet and exceed those standards. And actually, the first speaker we made, the Alpha, which is the big bad boy, it's interestingly enough got THX tests and approved for movie theaters up to 300 seats. So big.
Wow.
And yeah, so they're built on those standards, which they just make sense, which is a dispersion that's correct, that's lighting up the room correctly, that's driving the sound power correctly, all these different things. And I'm more than happy to stop talking about acoustics and talk all about speakers if you want, or we can do that some other time, however you guys want to go about it.
We can, we can answer this. I'll let you answer. You kind of touched on it already, but I'll let you answer this question, and we can go to one of your slides. But so this is uncertain. Heisenberg says, how relevant are the recent THX standards like Dominus rating? So I know you kind of touched on it already, but
very relevant, very relevant, and relevant in that sense of knowing that I'm going to say essentially an unbiased third party has verified that there's no mistakes made anywhere in the design of the thing. So
and I assume now those 3 tiers.
I'm sorry, hold on 1 second.
Oh, gotcha.
You can't hear who? I am being told by my observation gallery that Jordan, we can't really hear you, and maybe because I'm loud and Shane is loud and you're quiet. Does anybody else who is watching agree? Send a little note.
How about now?
How's the audio?
So Shane, say Hatoraid.
Hatoraid Cowboy.
Jordan, say the same.
Haterade Cowboy.
So the
people
peanut gallery over here came and gave me a thumbs up. You still about 4 dB quieter. Close enough.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I turned my mic up a little bit, so I'll get closer. So maybe that'll help some.
Excellent.
But everybody online says that they can hear me fine. So okay.
Nice.
Cool.
So
I know I tend to get excited and I talk loudly, so I got to be careful.
Let's do it.
Sounds good. So yeah, I'll let you decide which one you want to tackle first: acoustic treatment or speaker placement.
Let's talk a little.
And we have some questions that we'll answer later, guys. So I'm starring them.
Yeah, what would be amazing is to survey the audience and go, hey, what do you guys want to hear? I'll talk a bit about acoustics.
Okay.
And then if we have time, we can get a little bit into speaker design, dispersion. The reality is, for good sound, the two work hand in hand. And the way I look at it these days is, the speaker puts out a bubble of sound into the room, and different speakers have a different character to that bubble that changes with frequency. And then that bubble of sound, a very small amount of it actually hits your head and ears. And a lot of it's just kind of bouncing around like all these ping pong balls. And it's the two together. It's how the speaker radiates in the room and what the room returns to you, how much of it, how balanced it is, again, across frequencies, that leads to a sense that, wow, the sound quality is good in here. And you can't, it's hard to separate one from the other, but there it is in my view. I guess we're going to start with this. Let me go back over here.
Okay.
So pressing this button, pressing that button, hoping that goes to where it's going to go. Cool. So present, share screen. You guys on the viewing end have to know that there's about 4 sequences of buttons to hit in the right order to make sure you get to see this, and then you hide that. Can you see this beautiful space?
Yes. Let me make
All right.
this.
When I talk about acoustics, is actually a broad range of topics, really, ultimately. But the topic that's interesting, I think, for the audience here isn't about how well a sound wall is built next to a airport to keep the noise out of the residences next door, right? We don't really care about that. That is a field of acoustics. Acoustics could also cover the sound of whales in the South Pacific. We're not going to talk about that, right? But instead, what we're interested in is what happens to sound as it leaves a source, whether it's a violin or loudspeakers, and then bounces around the room and dies out over time. Like, what should I do? What should I get? Where should I put it? Where should that go? And I think of that as sort of the foundation that you're going to build your room on. Once you have that foundation right, you can pretty much choose any decent speaker and tune it the right way. It's going to end up with good sound. So let's start with a foundation, which is that acoustical bed. I like to think of a room thumbprint. This is a concert hall in Holland, or in the Netherlands, I should say. It happens to be in the Holland area of the Netherlands, called Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. It has a certain thumbprint. You put the musicians in there, you put the audience in there, they're playing, there's a certain character to what it does to the music. And I think you can imagine from looking at this room that it's probably pretty immersive. You hear the instruments playing, and you're kind of bathing in a nice reverberation. Now, interestingly enough, that thumbprint registers in your unconscious, in your brain, and it knows, okay, I first got a direct sound from the source, and then I got these reflections a certain amount of time later, repeated so many times, and there's this little calculator in your brain that goes, therefore I'm in a room about this big. And it's remarkable how good we are at that. If I walked you guys around blindfolded into a big room and played something out of a speaker and then into a small room, you would know immediately which one is the big room, which one's the small room, because we're sort of trained ourselves through continuous education and fuzzy logic to what that is. So the acoustics of the space can affect the tonal balance. There's some concert halls that support bass more than others. Some concert halls that support mids and highs more than others. So the same orchestra playing in these different concert halls will end up sounding different. And in all of that, we're going to try in this world, in the conversation here, to reproduce that concert hall in a much smaller room with its own thumbprint, and that has reflections that are much shorter and that tell our brain, yeah, I know I'm listening to Mahler's Symphony No. 5, but I'm in my own listening room because the walls are only 10 feet away from me here and here. And so those reflections tell you the wrong size for the room, because you're trying to hear this as it's a concert hall, or in the case of a movie that you're out in space or in a big train station or whatever. But also the character of those reflections can affect the tonal balance of what's coming off the speakers. I'll explain that. So the combination of a speaker's sound power, how it radiates, how it fills with a bubble of sound, and its dispersion, together with the reflections, really need to be neutral. If the acoustical package you're putting in the room, the acoustical treatments you put in the room, treat only the mids and highs and not the low mids and not the bass, everything's going to sound fat. If you only put bass traps, some people do, they go get sold on the idea that all you need is bass traps. Now you're reducing the reflected energy in the bass. Now the bass is a bit bass shy, it's tight, but you're left with mids and highs, so everything sounds a little honky. Not good. The overall system needs to be neutral. So by controlling the reflections, not eliminating them, but controlling them, you can actually fool your ear brain when you're sitting in this room to believe that you are listening to Mahler's Fifth at Concertgebouw in Holland. And I guess you could say that for music, that's the intent, is essentially to neutralize the reflection pattern of the room. So why do we talk about acoustics? Because they affect sound quality way more than cables, power, the actual power that you're feeding in, esoteric amps, etc. Way, way more. I'm not saying that those other things don't matter. Okay, it's good to have good cables and good power and power conditioning and having good amplifiers, but doing that while sitting in a room with horrible acoustics I think, is a waste of money. You're putting the money in the wrong place. I like to think that the acoustical character contributes at least 50% to the quality you hear, and that they're fixable. I've worked on so many projects where people go, well, the acoustics in this room suck. And so what? You're just going to leave it that way? You can fix it, and fixing it can save you dollars compared to spending a lot of money on a lot of other esoteric gear, because most acoustical materials are not that expensive. So let's talk about rooms. So to me, the acoustics of the room is the interface essentially between the speakers and the listener. So speakers over here, it's radiating sound into the room. It's bouncing around. You're sitting over here trying to hear it. And that bounce is part of the interface. Yep, there is a direct sound that comes to you. That air is pretty linear. That's not going to change the sound. And then there's everything else that's bouncing around the room that comes to you. And ultimately, the quiz is, how important is that? Is that important? Did you know that it's important?
Very
Shane,
important.
did you know? How important is it? And while you talk, I'm going to have another sip of coffee.
It's so important.
So why is it important? Let me show you this really simple little diagram. First, a little statistic. At the main listening room, main seat of a listening room, at the MLP, if you want to call it the main listening position, in a typical room, that's, especially if it's untreated, but even if it's got some treatment, there's actually more reflected energy going into your ear canal than direct sound from the speaker to you. This is the direct sound. This is a room seen from above. This is a really amazing speaker with a red cabinet and a horn on the top. Fantastic sounding speaker. And it feeds a direct sound to you. And then it feeds all these reflected sounds that are all a little bit later. They're all a little quieter, but the sum total of them is actually 2 to 3 times more sound energy than the direct sound direct from the speaker.
Interesting.
So we need to do something about that reflected energy. If it's uncontrolled, if it's loud, if it's biasing the sound one way or the other, whatever, it's going to screw up the sound of even the best speaker in the world. Whatever that is, whoever makes the best speaker in the world. There's a lot of manufacturers that would claim my speaker is the best in the world, whatever. If
Grimani
you don't,
Systems.
well, we do make good speakers, but you'll never hear me claim we made the best speaker in the world. That is a pissing contest that nobody can win. I will say that if you use our speakers in a room that's properly acoustically treated and properly designed, and you calibrate it correctly, chances are you're going to get an overall experience that will blow your socks off. And that's not to say that other people can't do it, but if you do all of those things, be prepared to be amazed. So let's look at that a little bit more. I've got the same drawing with a bit more detail here. This is your typical listener, receding hairline, glasses. That's me. Actually, I'm not wearing my glasses today, but listening, in the case of a home theater, listening to the sound coming off a center speaker. What's in a center speaker? What's the majority of what's in the center speaker?
Dialogue.
Dialogue. Do you know that dialogue could also come from the left speaker or the back right speaker? There's nothing in the electronics that say you can't put dialogue there, but conventional aesthetics says, the actor is in front of you right here. That's where you're going to put the sound. So by the same token, if you're watching a movie and there's a giant explosion right here, kablamo, guess where that sound is placed?
Everywhere, yeah.
It may
Most
be.
of your speakers.
The majority of the transient energy is going to be in the center speaker because that's where your eyes are seeing it. You may put the right there first and then bloom it out a little bit. The majority of the sound's in the center speaker and the dialogue's there. And I'm going to insist that dialogue's the most important part of a movie. Yeah, the effects, all the ambiances are cool, but you got to start off by having clean dialogue. So that's the direct sound. Okay. That blue arrow is the first sound that hits you, leaves the speaker, goes to, let's say I'm the speaker, hello, and then that's going right to you. That's the direct sound. Well, right after that, off axis from the speaker, there's a line of sound that just missed your ear that's going back over here, bouncing there, bouncing here, bouncing there, coming back, in this case, after 1, 2, say 3, 4, 5, about another 80 milliseconds later. That's way late, but it comes back to you later. And then there's another one over here that comes back with less bounces, another one over here that comes back, another one. Basically, every off-axis radiation of the speaker is going to find a bounce point that's eventually going to find you. So these are a simple set of reflections off the right wall, up to 3 or 4 bounces. There's more than that, but I'm just starting with that. And then there's the ones from the left wall. And then there's the ones from the ceiling and the ones from the floor. So if you look at all this, even just looking at the horizontal plane, there's a lot more red arrows here than there is blue arrow. Now, each one of those red arrows is quieter by maybe 2 or 3 dB, up to 10 dB quieter than the direct sound. But if you add all of that up, if you collect all that sound energy and put it all into a big cup of coffee, just dish it all in there and you add it up, it's 3 to 4 times louder or 3 to 4 times more energy than that initial direct sound that hits you. So I like to say that typically 75% of the sound you hear is reflected from the room. That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that, when you're talking about just the one speaker from the center channel, is this also multiplied if it's like a surround soundtrack movie and all the speakers are firing out at once, so it's multiplied by 7, 11, whatever? Yep.
So every speaker that's in this room is radiating one direct path. Let's say this, for you guys, this would be the left speaker. Kick my microphone, that's hitting you over there. And it's also bouncing all the way around the room. And so your brain is sitting there going, okay, I'm hearing all these sounds. Now, interesting part is that blue arrow, that original location is where you point the sound to, right? So at this point, somebody should go, yeah, well, whatever, I don't get it. I can still hear it's coming from that center speaker, even though you're telling me there's 2 or 3 times more coming from everywhere else, right? There's a cerebral process we have in our ear-brain system that's affecting what's either sometimes known as Haas effect or precedence effect, where in the presence of lots of sound reflections in a reverberant or echoey space, we pay attention to where the first sound came from, where I can see that these patterns are all coming from all these different places. Where's the first one coming from? And we're amazingly equipped with that to tell where the original source comes from. I contend that comes from instinct of preservation. When we lived in caves and in forests and places where we would be eaten by very large predators, that we had to quickly be able to tell, okay, that came from there, I better run in that direction. And if there's trees bouncing the sound around or cave walls bouncing the sound around, you don't want to just go, let me think about it. Maybe it's here. Not, by that time, you're dead, you're gone. Through theory of evolution, you've been eaten, you're gone. Bye-bye. So that's my theory of how that evolved. And it it works really well because you can be in an echoey space and see, hey, the sound's still coming from there. But when you listen to that dialogue in a room like that compared to the dubbing stage, that mix room where the film was made, you're like, it's a little fuzzy. I don't really understand all the lines of dialogue. You know what? I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit so I can understand it. And then suddenly that explosion in the center channel or everywhere else comes up and you're like, whoa, and then you have to turn it down. Pretty soon you're ramping the volume up and down. Anybody ever done that here?
Yep.
The volume ramp.
Especially with, I'm sure it's a little bit different, but with like streaming, that happens a lot because, different streaming services, different streaming shows, they might mix it differently, and you might have a certain level set for your Blu-ray or your high quality, your lossless stuff, but then you go to streaming and it's like, oh, I got to kick this up a notch, and then you have to keep constantly adjusting.
Yeah, and actually, on that topic, I could talk for the next 3 hours, and I won't. I agree with you. I will say that movie content is supposed to be remastered, not necessarily a remix, but contained so that it survives, not the needs of streaming. By the way, the amount of bits you can get through streaming, even in a very modest bit rate that you've paid for, are enough to do very good quality audio. Yeah. But there's audiences around the world that are listening to this stuff on little TV sets. If you're lucky, they actually have a sound bar, an expensive sound bar for $300. Oh my God. But the standard that everybody's trying to meet is, I want this to sound good over the tiny little speakers on the bottom of the TV set pointing down or pointing back into the wall. So there's a lot of effort done by film production companies to remix that and to try to contain it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it backfires, as you've noticed. Mm-hmm. There's also different standards for reference level. So there's a certain thing for film reference level where the average dialogue is. And then there's a standard that puts the dialogue much louder, that in which the reference level is set up for a different position. So it pushes the dialogue up. So as you're flipping through channels, you have no idea where it's going to be. And a part of me just wished as we had just stuck with the way the film industry did it, which is that there's a certain dialogue to peak level, just stay with that all the way across, or that it would have been solved by what's called Dolby dialogue normalization. There's actually a feature in Dolby Digital and also in Dolby Atmos by default that allows the system to detect where the average dialogue level is, and without having to jam your volume control, run for your volume control, as you switch channels, it's consistent. The peaks may be different.
Whatever. Yeah, I've seen that. I've typically never used it, but I've had that on pretty.
Isn't that only on older Blu-rays and DVDs? Is it still applicable to 4K?
The technology is there. It's been dropped from use because nobody wanted to deal with it, and it's a real pity because that would solve the issue of writing the volume control. It wouldn't solve the difference between average dialogue level versus peak when you have bad acoustics. So let's get back to this. So what do we do with all this? There's chaos going on. There's a lot of reflections. They're causing a loss of clarity and a loss of imaging. What also happens when you have all these reflections is rather than hear sounds clearly panning around the room or hearing them here or there, it's all sort of vague and a nebulous sense that, well, it's immersive, but I can't really tell where it's coming from. This is not the way to listen to a quality theater at any price of speaker. So our solution is going to be the judicious use of absorbers and sometimes known as diffusers. I like to group into a broader range called scattering devices, things that break up the reflections into smaller little pieces so that they're less disturbing. So ultimately, what we want is the experience of the film mix stage, that reference environment where you sit there and every line of dialogue, whether it's a whisper or something like yelled, all comes through totally clearly, even in the presence of lots of background music, lots of sound effects, explosions going on. You can still hear what they're saying. That's ultimately what we want. How do we get there? So I am going to teach you, if you follow me through this course and send $10,000 to Jordan right now, I'll teach you
do it.
What I usually find to work. So when it's all done, you could describe it as, wow, I hear I hear the sound coming from that speaker really clearly, and the tonal balance is really clear. It sounds like real dialogue, and I feel like I'm immersed in this really smooth environment without sounding like it's all echoey. I don't ever advocate getting rid of all the reflections. That is dumb. You want to preserve some amount of energy in the room that's helping it feel natural. Not too much, not too little. So this is ultimately what I sometimes joke is the buttery croissant of sound immersion, where you clearly hear what's coming out of either the center speaker or the left or the side left, whatever it is, and you're surrounded by the rest of the energy. And the conversation around that, how to get there, is not what absorber to buy, but what reflection decay time are you going for? Which is after you put sound in the room and it's bouncing around, how long does it take for it all to fall apart? So let's look at that. So the decay time is the result of multiple reflections in the room. And to get good sound, the decay time, the time it takes for the sound to stop to be done bouncing around, like where it's gone down 60 dB is the normal measurement. It needs to be the right amount, and the spectrum of it, the balance between bass, mids, and highs needs to be just the right amount. So as it turns out, there is a way to trace this. So let me show you what on what's called an impulse response, or a time spectrogram, reflected sounds would look like when the room's really good. So this would be the direct sound. Imagine what's playing into the room is a hand clap or something very impulsive, and you looked at it on either an oscilloscope or something that's showing you over time what's happened. You would measure or hear at the seat position the original direct sound, and then you would hear the reflections coming from the sidewalls, the ceiling, the floor. This would be the first order reflections, then later the second order reflections, where it takes 2 bounces, and then the third and the fourth, and eventually would all turn into this little mush known as reverb, which doesn't ever really happen in small rooms. And in a typical 450 square foot room, for those of you who are on the metric system, that's 45 square meters, you would want the decay to fall evenly, right? So what I'm looking for is not accidents of lots of reflections that happen now and then they don't go away and then they happen again, but as even as possible, and so that they die out at a target time. It turns out for a room that's 45 square meters, 450 square foot, the ideal target time is 0.32 seconds to get down to where they're basically inaudible. How did I come up with that? Did I wake up this morning and write an executive order that says it shall be 0.32 seconds? No, it's actually not even my opinion. So the way that showed up, that particular number showed up, was that a bunch of researchers, I think going back, believe it or not, 35 years ago, 35 to 40 years ago, said, hey, we'd like to know what's the ideal decay time for a listening room, for a home hi-fi listening room. And they got a bunch of listeners, trained and untrained, and put them in a bunch of different rooms using different acoustical treatments, and then just tried things until people said, I really like the way that sounds. So without trying to get into the brain of somebody, just going, just kind of like if you're trying to come up with a recipe, you try this recipe. Do you like this? You try that recipe. Do you like more salt? Do you like more pepper? Do you like more paprika? What do you like? And it turned out that those guys, I think the program was called the Eureka program, if I remember right. I may have that wrong. It's a while back. But it was a bunch of people from Denmark and Germany and England and Canada, a bunch of different countries got together and found that there was a statistical relevance. You put people into a 300 square foot room, 30 square meters, and most of them like a certain decay time. You put them into a 400 square foot room, 40 square meters, and they like that decay time. So it was not the same all the time. It depended on room volume. So the decay time in most of the ranges of rooms was between 0.2 and 0.4. And research shows that most people like that range of decay time with a pretty statistical relevance. And that decay time was put on a curve, and they went around and said, well, let's find an equation that fits that curve. And so this is an empirical equation, it's called. And if you give me a length, width, and height of a room, and then I divide that, or you divide that by 3,532, you take the cube root of that, you multiply by 0.3, you will know what decay time will make most people go, yeah, that sounds really nice in your room. By the way, if you live in the metric system, it's easier. The volume is divided by 100. See? It's a good reason to switch to metric. So what the hell does all this mean? So if you take a room, I'm just going to do this from memory. If you take a room that's about 22 feet long by 17 foot wide by 9 feet tall, if anybody has a calculator, you add all that together. I think that's around 3,500 cubic feet. Jordan's doing that right now.
Say that again.
22, 17, 9. Multiply those three things together. Tell me what.
22 times 17 times 9, 3,366.
3,366. Man, I missed. If 9.5, whatever the number is for that, that's right around there. That yields 3,532. You take that, you divide by that, you end up with 1, right? 3,532 divided by 3 is 1. Does anybody know what the cube root of 1 is?
The cube root, not the square root.
You know what the square root of 1 is?
1.
1. The cube root is also 1.
Okay.
And then you multiply that by 0.3, and that tells you that a room that's about 23 or 22 to 23 feet long, which is about 7 meters long, by about 17 or 18 by about 9, you should put enough absorbers and diffusers in there to get to about 0.3 seconds of decay time. Okay, and that's not my opinion. That's research shows that is. Now,
before we go on for a second, we have a super chat, so I don't want to forget about it. Chris Jordan says, "Will 3D diffusion 6 feet deep work with 8-inch ceilings?"
6 feet deep. Do you mean 6 inches or 6 feet?
6 inches.
I'm sorry, 6 inches.
Well, it says
no, 6 feet. Yeah. Well, yeah. So that says 6 feet.
If you're really short like me, you can put 6-foot diffusers in the room and try to crawl on the floor to get to your seating position, and then you have to sit like this. That's not going to work. If I assume you were talking about 6 inches,
yeah, that's probably what he was talking about.
The depth, maybe it was a joke. It's sort of funny. It sort of reminds me of one of those torture rooms that Batman and Robin would have been. 6 inches. Thanks, Chris. Yes, and it doesn't depend on how tall the ceiling is. A 6-inch deep diffuser, there's a whole bunch of different types. But by the time you're getting to six inches of depth, you're starting to operate over a broad enough region of frequency, which I'm going to talk about here soon, that it's going to do something useful. All right. Now, a handy rule of thumb on this is if you cover about 15% of your wall surfaces and ceiling with absorbers. So if you have 100 square feet of wall on the left and you put 15 square feet of absorption, that's going to get you towards that target. I'll show you the equation in a second. And that does assume you have some, a couch in the room, something that's kind of plush seating, and assumes that you have at least an area rug or full wall-to-wall carpeting. So ultimately, the amount of absorbers you want to put in the room is based on the size of the room. Now, not only is the amount of absorption matter, but the type of absorption matters, so that you're absorbing over a good range of frequency so that the decay time is consistent over frequency. This is really important. So I work in spaces all the time where somebody was misguided and they bought a bunch of 1-inch foam material, and they're like, it doesn't sound so good. And they put it everywhere. And what's happening if you just use 1-inch low density foam material and you put it everywhere, your decay time at high frequency is like 0.1 second. And somewhere around 2 kilohertz, the foam stops working so well, so the decay time climbs up to 0.6 seconds. So you're putting sound into the room from your beautiful speakers, and everything above 2 kilohertz is sapped out. It's like there's a direct sound and nothing coming back from the room. And at 500 hertz, it's bouncing around for 0.6 seconds. Guess what that's going to sound like?
Horrible.
Horrible, muddy, thick, ugly, not good. Dialogues, you're not going to understand what they're saying. That's not good. So you want to choose materials that have an effectiveness over a range of frequency so that the decay time at 1 kilohertz, the mid-range, is the same as 4 kilohertz, preferably all the way up to 8 kilohertz and all the way down to 100 hertz. There is some tolerance in that. It's been found that if the decay time goes up at 63 hertz as much as twice as big, so if the target was 0.3 seconds for our room that's 22 feet long, it's okay for the bass to resonate or to reflect around for 0.6 seconds without you going, wow, this sounds horrible in there, with an inflection point somewhere around 150 hertz. And then at the higher frequencies, it's also okay for it to get shorter, which is the natural effect of having carpeting and other things in the room. It's okay. But over the region, basically from 150 up to about 4 kilohertz, you want the decay time to be about the same. And then below that, a little bit longer and a little bit a bit shorter at the high frequencies is okay. So how do you get it right? You use the right amount of what's called frictional absorption, which is basically fibrous or foam absorbers. You use the right amount of bass absorber. So what's interesting, we're obviously not going to have enough time to get into all this. There's certain materials that work well for mids and highs, and there's certain construction topologies that work well for bass, and you want to blend those two things together in the right amount. So now, to know the right amount, you can either calculate this by using these really complicated equations called the Sabine, the Eyring, or the Arau-Prasadas equation that would be like going back to, in some cases, first year of college math. It's not calculus, but it's pretty complicated. And you can look it up. If you guys are interested, go to the internet, ask ChatGPT, what's the Sabine equation? Or you can simply follow the simple rule of thumb. I'll say it again, cover about 15% of the wall surfaces with absorption. If you can cover 15 or 20% with diffusion, that improves spaciousness. And the placement of them isn't all cluster them in one place and leave everything else reflective. Spread them out. Remember, you're covering only 15%, so there's a lot of open space. So spread the absorbers around like in bands. If it's 2x4 absorbers, put them in even spaces and interleave them with diffusion. That's like the most basic way to look at it. Okay. So,
I got a question about that. It's like when I talk to Gene, he's like, put your absorption up front and put some diffusion in the back. So you get a little openness back there. What could you use, like all absorption, and just if the spaciousness is in the soundtrack, just let the soundtrack be the spaciousness. Like
Shane, let me actually put that the other way around. Could you not use diffusion? Don't use more than 15% absorption, because the room's going to be too dead. And whether you're listening to a soundtrack with or without spaciousness, whether you're listening to 2-channel material or fantastic old jazz program material that's mono playing out of your 2 speakers, it's just not going to sound good if you put more than that. So then the question is, what does adding diffusion do? And I'm just gonna go back to whoa, I hit the wrong button. Sorry guys. Let me go forward here. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to do a bunch of this. Sorry. Ultimately, what the diffusion is going to do is improve the sense of spaciousness in the room. It's going to make it feel more right. And it's not radical. It's not like the room sucked before you put diffusers in there. But I've worked on a bunch of spaces where somebody had absorbers, and then we introduced diffusers, and like, oh man, I feel like now the bubble is more complete. Everything just feels better. And yes, there is spaciousness in the program material, and you want to hear that.
Yeah.
But I feel like in order to tie all the phantom images together, tie the whole thing together, having some amount of energy in the room that's not what's called specular, where the reflection bounces off the wall and comes back to you, and instead it's broken into small pieces, just sounds more realistic. And it's I would describe it as the cherry on top.
Let's say you got a voice that tracks through every single speaker.
Yeah.
So it has a specific sound in the front. As you add spaciousness to the back, isn't it going to sound a little open? Maybe a little echoey. I'm not sure, but just, wouldn't
Yeah.
you want to sound like it does in the front?
You do. And that's exactly the reason why not to do what you see in a lot of magazines is the entire back wall is covered with diffusers. Wrong. That assumes it's actually wrong even for 2-channel stereo, but the assumption was all the sounds coming out of the left and right speakers, it's bouncing off the back wall, getting diffused. That actually has its own problems. But in today's world of immersive audio, a sound could be anywhere. And it could be a voice, it could be the sound of a car, it could be anything. And so you almost want to treat the room, I almost want to say spherically, not completely, because even if there is, in the movie Gravity, which was on the very early Atmos movies, where voices are pounding around, that's really unusual. The fact is the majority of the program material is still I'm waving at the wrong screen, is still coming out of those channels for the, the things that accompany the screen. So before we run out of time, because we're almost at an hour, this would be kind of a recipe of what I would say this is where to put things. And I've got diagrams later that we may not get to for what the walls look like. But if this is a top view of your room and you say, okay, in order to fit that 15% rule, I've got a 2x4 absorber. This is 24 inches by 48 inches. That's 60 centimeters by 120 centimeters. And that absorber is actually a full 4 inches thick, 10 centimeters thick. You would put one here, one here, one here. So like evenly distributed down the left wall. Same thing on the right wall, evenly distributed. If you actually offset them slightly by 12 inches, 30 centimeters, a magic thing happens. First time I ran into that, I just couldn't believe. There's what's called binaural dissimilarity. The bounces off the left wall are slightly different than the right wall, and it helps your brain interpret those bounces as unwanted. What's wanted is what's coming out of either those two speakers that are here, the left and right, or the center speaker. If the walls are completely symmetrical, your brain thinks that that's an intended signal, and it makes it harder for your brain to accept that those are reflections. So binaural dissimilarity, as it's known, is that in here? I don't know where it's coming up, is good. So absorber, absorber, absorber on the back wall, 2 absorbers here, boom, boom, boom. Maybe you put some absorbers on the ceiling at the midpoint between the speakers and you. That's really all that you need. Now, if they were 4-inch thick, they would treat down to about 200 to 250 hertz. And you really want to control down lower, down to at least 100 hertz for just the reverberation, the decay time. And I would recommend putting some low frequency absorbers that are typically made out of a plate of wood in front of a fibrous material, maybe with some ports in it. I'll show you some pictures if we have some time.
Sure. So we're not capped at an hour. I mean, you can keep going.
I told you an hour when we talked on the phone, but it doesn't have to be that. Yeah, because we still got a bunch of questions. So we're good.
So when we start to see the numbers dropping out, let me know and I'll shut up.
No, it's actually getting more. So
people are jumping.
Excellent. Yeah. So this diagram is showing 2 things at once. It's showing a good placement for acoustical treatments. And I have another version of that shows the elevations all the way around. I can get to that. It's also showing good placements for speakers. So let's talk about that real quick. Speaker placement is not that magic. Yes, in the 2-channel audiophile space, there's all of this we got to put him this far away from the wall, all this stuff. Yeah, you do want to worry about the distance between these speakers and the bounce point off the front wall so that there's not a really nasty cancellation. Or you could put low frequency absorbers on this front wall to reduce that cancellation. And there are plenty of really good mid-bass absorbers that this reflection is usually causes a dip somewhere between 100 and 200 hertz. And it's not that hard to treat that. Once you have that on the front wall, sometimes people call this the back wall because it's behind the speakers. I call it the front wall. It's the one that's over there. You have more latitude in where you put your speakers, and then you don't have to pull them all the way into the room where your life partner is going. Do we really need to lose all of that room in front of our beautiful living room? So basically, center channel, above, below, or behind an acoustically transparent screen. And by acoustically transparent, I mean typically a woven material, something that's made out of woven microfiber with a coating of vinyl on it. Those are the better ones. The left and right speakers, either behind the screen or flanking the screen, such that they form a 45-degree angle. How do you figure that out? It's called trigonometry. It's the 2 times the inverse tangent of 22.5. I don't want to do that. So check it out. If you measure this distance from here to here, and you multiply that by about 0.85, that should be the distance between those 2 speakers, so that the spread of the image relative to what you hear in the dubbing stage is about the same. That'll give you a 45-degree angle. Follow that? So if you're 10 feet away from those speakers, that would be 8.5 feet. 8.5 feet. Simple enough.
If you're putting speakers behind the screen, would you not want to put, unless you have like a really tiny acoustically transparent screen, keep the left and rights within the boundaries of the screen rather than putting them outside of the screen?
Well,
that's what I was going to ask.
Shane, how big should the screen be? So here's the interesting thing. If you go back to that screening room thing and you read the documents by SMPTE, as it's called, Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, of which I'm a member, card carrying. I think I have my badge somewhere over here. At least I have my tattoo. The screen width should be 50 degrees. Now, in the broadcast industry, everybody talks about in screen heights. I don't get that. I just get that from the left of the screen, actually from your direction, the left of the screen to my head, to the right of the screen, should be 50 degrees of field of vision. That's what a film director is composing the image for in normal applications. For IMAX, it's a different story.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the screen. And in movie theaters and in dubbing stages, the speakers are put in right on the inner edge of the screen. And that's where the 45-degree comes from. It's not a magic number.
Yeah.
Why not 60 degrees between left and right? Well, you could try that. You would, 2 problems is it would not be a match to what the director and sound designer heard when they were mixing the movie. And in many cases, there's a lot of speakers out there that won't support a really good sound image, a good phantom center image at 45 degrees. And you start to bring them in from, at 60 degrees. You start to bring them in from 60 to 50 and you go, ooh, suddenly the phantom center is much better. You come into 45, ooh, it's really clear. You get much narrower than that. Now there's no separation between the left and right. So the default has been in the cinematic environment that the left and right speakers form a 45-degree angle from your head. The screen's 50 degrees, and you put the speakers behind, all 3 speakers behind the acoustically transparent screen. If you're not doing projection and a really big screen, and you're doing a regular TV, place the speakers so that they're about 45. And I will say, however, sometimes that puts them in a place in the room where there are boundary conditions that screw up the bass.
Yeah.
Or puts them in a place in the room where the standing waves are suddenly really horrible in the bass region. So placing those left and right speakers is actually a way more complicated thing than one simple item will call for. And I could sit and spend 3 hours talking about just what are all of the factors. But if you start with a 45-degree angle, if you use subwoofers so that their speakers aren't carrying deep bass, you cross them over somewhere around 90 hertz, between 80 and 100 hertz, so that the bass is not dependent on the position of those speakers. And if you put some kind of bass absorption on the front wall, you should have good sound out of those speakers. Now, the placement of the side speakers, what used to be called surrounds, I call them side. These are the side speakers. These are the other back speakers. The placement of the side speakers typically should be at somewhere between 90 degrees and 110 degrees from your main seating position. The point between that is about 100 degrees. So if you were to say this is 90 degrees over here, I'm pushing that out to about 100 degrees. You could use a protractor. I'd put some 2 feet or something behind your seating position. And I usually like them up at about 6 feet in the air. And that 6 foot in the air ends up matching the cinematic environment. So I won't try to go back to that, but the picture in the dubbing stage, that blue room where you could see the surround speakers, they're up higher than the seating position. They're at 50 degrees. They're up 15 degrees from your seated ear height. So you could do the trigonometry of that. You could figure it out. You could take a laser level. You could take your iPhone or your other phone and turn it up to where it says 15 degrees. You'll find in most rooms that puts the middle of the speaker somewhere around 5.5 or 6 feet off the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's people who say, well, what about for music? Does music want to be that low? It's like, I don't know, man. There's no standards for how you mix music. There are standards for what the director heard in the mix room when the mix was being done, and we may as well abide by those standards.
So you want to put them like a couple of feet above your head is what you're recommending?
Yeah, 2 feet above your head.
Wouldn't that kind of like almost diminish a little bit from the Atmos side effects? Like, don't you want them
doesn't. It doesn't, because the Atmos, actually, by the way, that's not Atmos.
Sorry, not high channels, top channels.
Top channels. I do have to remind people. Atmos is a coding technology Dolby came up with that allows to put, in proper engineering term, a shit ton of directions of sound into a pipeline that's only this big, that has no business carrying 32 directions of sound. And they came up with a way to do it, man. They're experts at that.
Yeah.
It's like teleporting. Beam me up soundtrack, and you crash it in this tiny little thing and then reconstitute over there. Now, of course, the big improvement that brought is the ability to put speakers up high. Mm-hmm. But I also think what a lot of people forget is it gave us the ability to put a wide channel speaker that would normally be here that I don't have in my drawing. I think this is a great channel. But so the speakers over there, the top channels, which I don't have right now in this drawing, would end up like along this line between the center and right. That's the standard from the movie theater or the production space. So that speaker's not at 90 degrees above you, but if this was 0 degrees, that's 15 degrees. That ends up putting that speaker at 60 to 70 degrees up that way. And I see people put them out too far out, which then means that you're confounding it with the side or back speakers. It's really hard to tell which ones they are. And it also means that it doesn't really fill the canopy over you. When it's raining from over there rather than like, woo, I'm getting wet. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying it's raining because it's a common effect you may want to put up there.
So I have a question. So when we're talking about like the LCR placement, for me, I'm limited because my room is only 10 feet wide. I have a acoustically transparent screen, but I had half of my room was a bedroom, so there was a closet behind the screen, and I removed the closet doors and I put my center channel, but I don't have room to put my left and right behind the screen, so they're angled out. What are your thoughts on like Trinov with the spatial remapping? Do you think that that's actually effective to fix maybe speaker placement if you're limited?
I haven't heard it work as well as they would claim. And I know my buddies from Trinov are going to be like, hey, you're lying. It's like, I've been in all the demos and you listen to it. Ultimately, what it's doing is creating phantoms between the speaker that you have at the wrong position and an adjacent one, trying to pretend like it's moved over. And you move your head a little bit and it's not there. I would rather hear the pure sound of the speaker in the wrong angle than something that's a little fuzzy. Sorry, guys at Trinov. Love you. Friend.
You also have to be like, you also got to get the MLP. Like, you can't be in a wing seat. Like, you have to be in the middle.
You have to be at the middle, and you have to be like right at that position generally. I wouldn't, I basically, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah. I don't really have a problem with it, but I was just curious is like if people have maybe like a really weird layout in their room and they're like, hey, this speaker is not, this speaker's way off from my, left and my right and it's off. I didn't know, I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Dolby has a technology that is supposed to allow you to map anything anywhere you want. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know if you guys have heard it. And Trinov has that. Other people have that. Ultimately, it's playing a bunch of tricks to try to simulate that something's over here when the drivers are really somewhere else. Try to put them close to where they should be, and listen to the results with and without. Always go, okay, this is what it sounds like with the speaker in the wrong place, but not diddled with. now I'm going to do this, whatever, this remapping, the simulation. What does it sound like? Is it clear? Is it fuzzy? Is it just, if you're happy with the result, cool, go with that.
Would you, as far as like side surrounds, would you put them in line with your ears or slightly above the ears?
So like I said, either 90
Go forward.
degrees, about 2
Yeah.
feet up, or preferably slightly behind that at 100, not more than 110 degrees from center. I'm calling this 0 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And that's 22 degrees. That's where your left or right speaker is. Fully to your side, I'm running out of screen over here, is 90. I'd go back a little bit. And then let's keep going. The back channels. I don't call them the surround rears. I don't call it, I call them the back channels. These are the front channels, side channels, back channel. And I call them that so that what they're written on the tag of the wire that you're using is BL and BR. To not confuse it with, like, if you called this the right rear speaker, you would write on the wire, RR. And you write it on there, you give it to somebody to connect it on the other side, and they're going to connect it in the right channel of the amplifier. I'm like, wow, that's not sounding right. So back channel. I know a lot about these back channels. I sound like a president. I know a lot about this. Nobody knows more. I know about it because I actually developed the original patent for how to create that in a movie theater with a release of Phantom Menace. The invention itself, whatever. What I learned, the invention of how to code them in there is a patent that's expired. Who cares? What I learned is that to play the sound out of those back channels in a way that you can clearly hear it behind you and not be confused with it coming from in front of you or somewhere else is remarkably difficult. So you put a pair of speakers behind you over there and you play the same sound to them, and it doesn't obviously sound like it's over there. Half the time it sounds like it's in front of you, which is really weird. It's called a psychoacoustic inversion or reversal, and it just comes from the fact that those two sounds are grazing your ears and going into your canal at the same time with correlation, the same way as sounds from in front of you out of two speakers, and your brain doesn't know. And the more they're placed plus and minus 30 or plus and minus 22.5, forming the same kind of angle in the front, the more it's confusing to actually hear them behind. You turn your head and you can hear that they're behind you, but just watching the screen, that doesn't sound right. So if you want to try this and you have a pair of good front speakers, turn around and listen to what they're playing. You'll be confused that suddenly the sound's like in the other direction. So the tricks around there are to get them closer. So not a 45 or 60 degree subtended angle total, but 30 degree, which puts them like 4 to 6 feet away from each other, not very far.
Mm-hmm. I have a center back. I use a center back. Well, I use a center, left and right and a center. So 3.
And a center, yeah. So that's one way around it. Sometimes that makes things better. Sometimes it gets more confusing. It depends on the room. And then other little trickery you can do is to offset their height a little bit so that the way they're radiating to you is a little bit different, which means they're not quite so correlated and you don't really think it's a perfect phantom image behind. You can offset them with decorrelation if you are lucky enough to be able to go in there and tune what's called an all-pass network and an equalizer. You can shift their phase response so they don't create a phantom image. That's another trick if you have one of the better equalizers. There's a bunch of things you can do, but basically they should form about a 30 degree total angle, plus and minus 15, which puts them 4 to 6 feet away from each other. Also at about 15 degrees up, which is typically 5 to 6 feet off the floor. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it's fine to put them right on the wall. If you can, it's fine. Their base response accuracy is not nearly as important as what's coming from the front channels. All right. We'll talk later about the top channels. Let me keep going over here. Back to acoustical treatments, and then we're going to cut out. So ultimately, if you do what I was suggesting to do, and you look at those reflections, that reflection that's all the way out at 60 degrees or 70 degrees is going to hit an absorber. 10 degrees in, it's going to hit a scattering device, a diffuser, and it's going to re-radiate with little smaller parts of waves. Then it's going to get absorbed, re-radiate with little reflections, absorb, re-radiate with little reflections all the way around. So ultimately, in this thing I'm advocating, this recipes, there's going to be a direct sound, still the same one. There's still going to be reflections off the side and back wall, but those reflections will be partially, those reflections are absorbed at certain places, only 15 to 20% at the most. Some of them are still finding an untreated pane of wall, so it's actually bouncing like a specular bounce. And some of them are going to find a scattering device that's going to return sound into the room in a very spatial way and give you a sense of envelopment. And out of that, if you do it right, you're going to have a really even tonal balance, because assuming you use a good speaker with good frequency response, where its tonal balance of what it's putting in the room is smooth. And if you use the right kind of absorbers that are deep enough and the right kind of diffusers that are deep enough, you're going to have a return from the room that's tonally balanced. You're going to have a smooth sound field with binaural dissimilarity, which will make your brain essentially accept that the room is sort of neutralized. And you will end up with my famous crescent of really smooth sound dispersion. That's kind of the recommendation. Now, I'm gonna stop for for all intents and purposes. I can talk a lot more about all of these things. I'm keeping it pretty surface level in terms of what you do and what you don't do. I do want to actually put up this really important slide so you guys see it. Sorry. Every time I go to wanting to do a presentation, I got to hit many buttons. Share screen, number uno. This is an important conceptual slide, which is please use absorbers that are thicker than 2 inches. 2 inches minimum. A 1-inch absorber only works down to 1 kilohertz. And so it's basically splitting the spectrum where it's just not enough. A 2-inch panel, there's plenty of manufacturers that make 2-inch panels, works down to 500 hertz. That's good. If you really want really good sound in a dedicated or semi-dedicated room, you really want to go to 4 inches of thickness, which brings you down to 250 hertz, and how it's controlling the bounces off the wall. And that's good. That's useful. Anything thinner than that, you're going to notice, like, man, it just is not sounding so good. So I'm going to finish all this by doing a little bit of self-promotion on the products we're actually selling.
Okay. And then we can get to some questions if you have time after.
Yeah, I can do that. So without sounding like I want to toot the horn, I just want to say, hey, number one, there's a bunch of people making decent acoustic absorbers and diffusers out there. There's a bunch. There's some that make things that are not so good for the money, some that are really good for the money. There's a bunch. And I also want to mention that I have launched a company that sells these things. We have things that are made in different factories. This particular line that I'm going to talk about over here, called Sonitus, comes to us from Croatia. That was designed by a really cool guy called Manuel, who's a drummer who decided, I want to make my own treatments because I can't buy them. And then one thing led to the other, and now he has a huge factory that builds these things really, really nice. So it's called Sonitus. We're the US and South America distributor for that. And in the Sonitus line, there's all kinds of different really cool things. There's a basic absorber that's got a curved front, and it's covered with a velvet finish, really, really beautiful. It's available in many colors. It's 2 foot by 2 foot, 60 centimeter by 60 centimeter. And there's two versions. There's an 8 centimeter version, which is 3 inches, and there's a 12 centimeter version that's 5 inches. The 5-inch one works down to 160 hertz. The 3-inch one works down to 250 hertz. And it works down a little lower than a normal frictional absorber because the top layer that's on there, this velvet flocking, acts as a little bit as a tympanic absorber. So that I don't have time to explain, but there's data on the website that shows, yep, here it is measured by a professional lab, and it works. And so it's available in a bunch of different colors. There's another really groovy looking product called the Wave X. This is probably not something you want to put in the middle of your living room, but something really cool to put if you have a dedicated space, because on the wall, this product that's made out of the same materials, it's a dense polyester fill, looks very cool. It's available in a black or white, and on the wall, it could look like this. so it's kind of a kind of cool techie look.
Yeah.
We have a more entry level absorber called a quad absorber. It's 8 centimeters thick. Works well down to 300 hertz. It's a little bit more rudimentary looking, I would put. It's big. It works. Thank you. That's the website, Sonotus USA. We also have 2 foot by 4 foot absorbers that are framed that come in a few different colors. You could use those for your ceiling. You can use them for your wall. The core is the same dense poly. It's instead of being polyurethane, it's actually a polyester absorber. Works very well. So now we get into this other thing that I mentioned was some level of mid-bass absorber to put on the wall behind your speakers. And we have a series of products that are called the Decozorbers that are good. Let me go to that. They come in many different finishes, and they work down to pretty good low frequency. And they're essentially a chunk of the same dense polyester that's covered with this plate that ends up acting partially as a frictional absorber and partially as a tympanic absorber. And so they absorb bass pretty well. They don't absorb a lot of highs because the template, the actual wood material that's on there that is perforated blocks the highs from getting absorbed, which is good. You don't want to over absorb the highs. Let's not talk about this. Now, we also have a specific range of low frequency absorbers. This is a whole series on low frequency treatments, but we have this product called the Deco Trap, which is a low frequency trap. It's a plate of wood that's got some perforations on its slots or other that is mounted in front of a thick chunk of polyester foam that you put in the corner. And it comes in different colors and styles. And you, in a small room, you put 2 of those in the bottom front corners. In a bigger room, you put 4. In a really big room, you put 8. And those will absorb well down into 55 to 60 hertz and take care of the low frequency range of the room. And those are really cool. None of these things are particularly expensive. They all ship from a plant from a warehouse over here. The prices you see online are all include shipping. So that's all available. All right.
Is that trap right there? I've seen a lot of videos where it's like you need some space behind it. That looks like it fills the whole gap. Is that in truth to that?
That's pretty deep. That fills about 8 to 9 inches of the corner. So it fits in the corner. There's a big chunk of foam behind it. I forget the whole depth. There it is. It's 16 inches deep at the tip. So yeah, you need space. Ultimately, when you're talking about bass absorption, you need an air volume behind that'll catch those waves.
Right. Okay.
All right. So that's on the absorption side. I'm going to talk a bit about the diffusers. Look at that. I have a whole set of slides on diffusion and what works and what doesn't work. And I'm more than happy to come back and talk about that. But in terms of the products we have at the really basic rudimentary level, we have this relatively cost-effective, what I call a 2D diffuser. That's one that re-radiates the sound on a plane. That's 3 inches thick. It works down to pretty well down to, it says 600 hertz, 600 to 800 hertz, somewhere there. It covers not all of the range of sounds you want to, but you get what you pay for. It's cost effective, doesn't take up a lot of room. Then we have the Big Fuser. Big Fuser. There's 2 versions of the Big Fuser. There's a kind of a straight finish that looks kind of like a skyline, and then there's a curve finish. It's a lot smoother looking. Same response, works well down to 300 hertz. There's a version of this that's made out of dense polyester, dense styrofoam, but is actually painted with a hard acrylic painting. And it's available in black, white, and gray, both of these versions. They're really cost effective. They work great. There's also a version of that that's made out of solid wood. That thing weighs about 45 pounds, 20 to 22 kilograms. When you put it on the wall, make sure you use really good fasteners or else it'll rip out your sheetrock. And it's the same beautiful shape, and it's solid European oak. This is no joke. Costs a little more.
Yeah.
So,
different colors.
And it comes in various finishes. that include a walnut, a sort of a cherry look, and then a what I call light oak. By and large, this is what we sell the most. Oh, and black. Sorry, black white. So black white, light oak, and then a few other wood finishes. Then we have this interesting series of products that are a combination of absorbers and diffusers. This thing called a six strip, which is a thickness of dense polyester foam that's covered by these strips that are all angled differently. So you put that on the wall, some of the sound gets absorbed, some of it gets scattered out. So this is a nice and elegant looking solution that does both. So that's what that looks like. We also have this product called the Archwood, which is a little bit like the Decozorber, but it's got a curved shape. So some of the sounds get scattered in this curved direction. Some of them get absorbed in through the slots. Kind of another good solution if you go, I got to put something on the wall that doesn't look so aggressive. You put a few of those on the walls of a multi-purpose room, and it doesn't look like a sound lab. Okay. So that's what I wanted to cover today. And I know you said there are some questions. Why don't we take them?
Yeah, we've got about 26 now. And yeah, we'll have to have you come back on for part 2, part 3, because you're a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, I know we haven't even scratched the surface, but yeah, that was very, very interesting, very informative. Let's see, comments. So we have, first one says, advice on window plugs or removable treatments, often a challenge in the multi-purpose room. Just board it up?
So here's an interesting thing. Why would you put a window plug? Is it in order to get rid of the sound reflection off the window, or is it to block the sound from going out the window? Okay, depends on what you're doing. If the windows are leaking sound and you're trying to prevent sound from coming in because there's a freeway right there, or an airport nearby, or a train going by once in a while, then there are some windows that will actually absorb or block a fair amount of sound. If you don't have that, then you definitely want to plug that window, put a board on there made out of preferably 3/4 inch ply, or 2 layers of 1/2 inch with this thing called green glue in the middle. It's going to be a little bit heavy. You put that in the window, and you got to make sure it's gapped or that it's caulked all the way around with some foam. I shouldn't say caulked. I should say that it's got a good gasket all the way around using a foam weather strip. If you're not worried about sound isolation of sound coming in or going out, by the way, and I've worked on projects where you've got a residential area where the houses are all butted up to each other, and somebody wants to play their theater really loud, and the neighbor's like right there, and they're complaining.
Me?
That's you.
Me and Shane. Well, more so me, but...
Well, the answer is invite them over to watch the movie. They may not like your taste in movies. But, so then you got to do sound isolation. If it's just in order to do something so the sound doesn't bounce off the window, you could just use a thick drape. The right type of thick drape made out of thick materials with preferably a lined drape that's got a flannel lining inside. That can work pretty well. Don't cover an entire 8-foot wide patio door with a drape on one side of your room and expect that's going to sound good, because that's just too much absorption. So what do you do? What if you have an 8 or 10-foot patio door on the left and you want to do something with it? So what we've often done is had a special drape made that's a lined drape, that the back side is a blackout vinyl layer. The front side is a fabric that you've picked that's reasonably acoustically transparent. And between those two, you put strips of 3 inches of what's called waffle bump, is the actual term in drape making. It's a thick flannel. And you put a strip, and then you have a 6-inch gap. And you put another strip of 3 inches and 6-inch gap. And now what the drape is ultimately strips of absorption. And then the rest of it, the sound that's going through the fabric is hitting the blackout vinyl and maybe the glass behind and is reflecting back. So that's a way to put a drape that's blocking light and doing some amount of absorption without it being too much. Warning, that's a custom drape. Somebody's going to charge you a good amount of money to make that. Or if you're really handy with a sewing machine, you're welcome to do that. Be prepared to spend a bunch of time and break a bunch of needles.
Next question. How relevant? Okay, we already did that one. Let's see here. Any word through the grapevine if there are plans for the next Dolby Atmos?
No. How's that?
I would imagine if you did, you couldn't talk about it.
I'm going to mention this. If you actually go deep into the bowels of Dolby Labs' technology evolutions, you'd be amazed what they're working on all the time. That are either little tweaks to improve what's going on, or pretty radical new things to create new transmission formats. And Dolby Atmos is a lot more complicated, actually, than they lead up to. And that's normal for a technology company. They're not going to give you, it's not that they're hiding it, but their communication can't address every single little detail of what they do because they'd never get done and people would just get confused. So I would encourage you, if you want to know what Dolby's doing, just start doing searches. Ask ChatGPT, ask Google, what's up with Dolby Atmos, and see what they pop up with. There's a guy who works for me, Chase Walton, who is following up on that all the time, and almost every week there's a new little treatise from him that I'm like, man, I wish I could put this out in a blog form to the world. And one day we'll do it. One day we'll figure it out. Maybe one day I'll put it all together in like a little binder and I'll send it to you, Jordan. You can disseminate it. But Dolby's working on stuff all the time. That's all about kind of controlling, improving, doing little tweaks. Now, as a sound format, like what's next after Dolby Atmos, I would go, well, what's broken with Atmos? It works very well. I'll be honest with you, what Atmos does in low bitrate streaming in terms of capacity for separation is not as good as what's on an actual DCP, a digital cinema print, if I can call it like that. It's not the term, but what actually goes to a movie theater. And the bandwidth is a lot more restricted. So if you actually listen to the top channels and the object channels on their own, shut everything else, and you listen to what they sound like, you're going to hear it going on its, but who's listening to that on their own? It's always playing together with everything else. And Dolby's pretty good about finding, like, what can we get away with so that there's no audible impairments where most people don't hear it. So how do you improve on that? Maybe some slight improvements on codecs, or convincing the streaming companies to give a little more bandwidth to audio. Good luck with that. The reality is it's all about picture. It's all about trying to squeeze the bandwidth to an absolute minimum because that costs money. And as long as it's good enough, it's good enough. So that's about all that I can say.
What about the floor level speakers?
What are you calling the floor level speakers?
Landing across your baseboard.
Baseboard speakers. I put heaters there. No comment. How's that?
Okay, we got a super chat. Can a bookshelf speaker like the B&W be hung on wall for sure sound speakers?
For sure sounds. Not sure what sure sound speakers are. Maybe it's surround speakers. Any speaker can be put on a wall and play. If it was voiced for being, it's kind of interesting what a bookshelf speaker is. Let's rewind. You go back through history. In the beginning, speakers were like this thing that were in the room, and then they became a smaller speaker that was on a stand far away from boundaries. And then there was like, I'd like to be able to put something in a bookshelf, and they made them small and voiced them so that the bass response expected the reinforcement you're getting from the bookshelf. Then you take a true bookshelf speaker and you put it on a stand, and it sounds bass shy. So if it really is a bookshelf speaker, which almost nobody makes anymore, and you put it on a wall, it's actually its bass response will be voiced properly. But if you take a speaker that was designed to be put on a stand in the room, maybe 2-3 feet away from the walls, and you stick it on the wall, the bass is going to get louder by several decibels, and it may sound thick and congested. So now what? They have this thing now called equalizers. They've been around for 60 years. And you can either do a manual EQ to correct that, or you can use this automated or semi-automated EQ to basically taper down that low frequency excess. And so, yes, you can. It'll produce sound. It may be bass heavy, which you can compensate by turning down the bass.
Thanks for your super chat.
Yes, thank you. Rail makers of subs are big fans of full range speakers in Rail 3D setup where all channels run full range. Do you like that kind of setup, Anthony?
Absolutely not. Why?
Hot take.
Bunch of different reasons. One is nobody really makes a full range speaker in the context of what we're talking about here. What I would call a full range speaker for either music or film is one that can play all the way down to 18 hertz at 110 dB of sound pressure level in the room. That looks like a speaker that's got at least one, if not two, 15-inch woofers, and you're multiplying that all the way around the room. Nobody's doing that. I shouldn't say nobody. Somebody could go out and buy a bunch of really big speakers and lay them all around the room. And then what you would end up with is the bass response of that speaker will be completely different to the bass response of this speaker and completely different to the bass response of that speaker because they're all in different places relative to the standing wave, gain, and loading of the room. And what you want is all the sound to sound the same. And I've got, if you guys want to go look it up, I've done several live streams about bass management, bass optimization, including lots of data from lots of different rooms that shows, hey, here's a room, I've got 5 speakers in it, here's the speakers at 5 locations. Look, they're all different by 20 to 30 dB of difference in the bass. And so when somebody says you should use 5 full range speakers around the room, they've obviously never measured the results of 5 full range speaker or 7 full range speakers in a room, or else they wouldn't say that. So in my view, it's a lot better to use speakers that play down to 80 or 90 hertz, which is a frequency where most rooms start to get what's called modal in acoustics. It really is where they start to have strong standing wave effects. Then you hand off to subwoofers that are placed around the room in a place where they're not going to exacerbate standing waves, and then you tune them to reduce the standing waves. Now you got good bass. And a sound could be put in the soundtrack going around you that has full bass response, like, a jet plane in a Maverick movie, and it sounds consistent all the way around. And I've got data on hundreds of rooms that shows you can't get away with 5 or 7 full range speakers and expect consistent bass. Doesn't work.
What do you feel about the Derek Morant's directional bass setting?
I could already tell from his face.
Bass is to our ears, bass is not directional. In small rooms, bass is not really directional because it's filling the room and getting standing waves. So that really it's about other things actually. That setting. The main thing is, I feel like it's if you can get to the point where you're doing, I'm going to call it summed bass, if you want to call it. It's not really it's monophonic. It's one channel of bass that you extract all of the bass from all of the main channels. You add in what's called a low frequency effects channel. You put that all together and distribute it to at least 2 subwoofers and preferably 4, and you time optimize them. You'll end up with bass that's so good you won't need to do anything more. And some of the other trickery that many people are doing right now sometimes doesn't work as well. Keep it simple. Just kind of like in cuisine, you can do really complicated recipes, and sometimes just putting a little bit of salt on that chicken, stick it in the barbecue, let it go. Sometimes is the best thing you can do. Making me hungry.
Speaker dispersion, narrow or wide? Any studies on most favorable?
Yes, there are lots of studies. A lot. It depends on the environment. If we're talking about our spaces, the ones we're here to talk about, I'm not talking about a church. I'm not talking about a train hall. I'm talking about residential spaces. The work, and I'm going to credit Dr. Floyd Toole, who's got some credentials. He was the director of the acoustics division of the National Research Council of Canada in acoustics. So he knows something. He was also the president of the Audio Engineering Society. He knows something. And he led the research department over at Harman International. That's the same company that has all these different speaker brands, but he wasn't designing speakers. He was doing pure research. This is a guy who's basically written the book on what speakers in rooms do. If you are really into it, I would pick up his book called Sound Reproduction. It explains, it basically goes into all the depth I'd love to get into, but it would take us 12 hours. His research shows that the speakers that sound better to most listeners are ones that have a really even sound power, so a dispersion that's nice and constant in the room, vertically and horizontally. It doesn't have to be the same, but that basically, as you measure them at 500 hertz, 2 kilohertz, 10 kilohertz, the way they radiate their sound bubble in the room this way and that way is constant. And that usually leads to a wide dispersion speaker. If you had a narrower dispersion horizontally and vertically, that could still sound good, but it needs to hold down to at least 200 hertz, right? And that means it's a really big speaker. The mouth of the horn, I'd have to go back, would have to be about that big this way and that way for it to actually control evenly all the way down. Just not practical and not necessary. My approach these days is put a speaker with really even and wide dispersion, like the ones we're building or any of the other companies that do good speakers. You know, I'll give credit where credit is due. Of course, we're doing good with that. But also per listen, a number of speakers in the Harman line, a bunch of the JBL stuff, a bunch of stuff from Paradigm, you name it, have really even wide dispersion, constant, not just wide, but constant. So it's the same. And then you control by the acoustical treatments in the room, how much room return you're getting. That's a lot easier than trying to make a speaker that's like trying to contrive the dispersion. It's really hard to do. It's hard to do well. I'll say this one last thing is, if you look into the music industry business, you look at the PA speaker you buy for $500 or $600 that you normally put on a stick on a tripod and the DJ brings over for dancing, often made out of plastic. Inert plastic, but it's normal plastic. Those things all have horns on them, and their dispersion is usually, you know, it's wide until about 1 kilohertz, and then they all go, and they all sound kind of like this. And,
speaking of those speakers, I've seen those JBLs that are kind of curved, like those line arrays. I believe they're made out of plastic. Have you heard those? Are they any good?
So line arrays are a completely different thing, and in my view, should actually not be used in a home theater. They're great for big outdoor venues, not in this environment. And then that small one they make that's about this tall. I've done a few rooms with that because the client or their integrator, that's what they wanted. It's hard to make that sound good. Its application's totally different. It's for commercial things. You're just trying to blast the sound of a voice on a microphone, and there's different requirements.
Interesting.
Justin
Carter
sure
wants to say, you are a wealth of information. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you,
Justin Carter.
And I'll say,
thanks for the super chat.
Grimani brings the super chats. We got, let's see. How low do you usually try to treat before the wavelengths get too long to bother with?
Yeah, that's a great question. We could speak for 6 hours about that. Usually these days, and you know, this keeps evolving. If you'd asked me this 15 years ago, I would have given you a slightly different answer. So these days, I do want to control. I'm going to separate this into two parts. I'm going to call one part is the what's known in acoustics the free field character, the stuff that's just bouncing around the room. Try to go down to 200 hertz. 100 if you can, but at least down to 200 hertz. So this is for really good sound. 200 hertz up to 10 or 11, you know, up to 10 kilohertz. Treat the room evenly so that everything that's bouncing around the walls and the ceiling and the floor is consistent. Below that, you start to get into standing waves. And you can try to treat standing waves with bass traps, things that actually resonate and control how the walls or how the room returns the sound in the room. And that's kind of cool to do. It's complicated. And so you should try to do something. I would say, you know, look up on the internet all the different resources for how to design a perforated face bass trap. We actually designed a thing years ago that's called a spring trap, which was this corner mounted thing with these precision springs and this plate that resonated into all these Helmholtz resonators. It was really complicated and expensive to build. We stopped making it because it's just so much money. And so then you go, well, what do you do with the standing waves? Well, I have found that if you just resort to 4 smaller subwoofers, so where you would have put maybe one 18-inch subwoofer because you like really loud bass, if you instead of doing that, use 4 12s, or in a smaller room, 4 good 10-inch subwoofers. And there's a bunch of manufacturers out there that make very good 10 and 12-inch subwoofers that play really damn loud for the side of the cone. You put 4 of them in the 4 corners, and you tune them manually or with one of the bass optimization automated things. You'll get rid of standing waves enough that you don't have to worry so much about them acoustically. It's good to worry about them, but sometimes taking care of it acoustically is really complicated and expensive and cumbersome. I'll mention this one more thing and then move on. If you're ever building a room that's got a riser, it's got 2 steps. That platform is a beautiful big volume to do bass absorption. So rather than close it all up, if you're putting a riser in there, perforate the top of the riser, like maybe a third of the top of the riser, mainly where the seats are, with little holes, like 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch holes on 3-inch centers or something like that. Throw a bunch of R30 inside the riser, some attic insulation. And now what you have is sort of a damped Helmholtz resonator that's going to absorb bass pretty broad band and get rid of some of the standing waves that are naturally in the room. And that's essentially free. I mean, you have to buy a bag of R30. Come on, that's cheap.
Yeah. Don't you want to put some holes? You want to drill some holes in the front of that first?
You can put holes in the front. I just don't know how to make that look pretty. If you put holes on the top and you cover it with a carpet that's got open back chute, and you put it under the seats, it's no biggie. You don't have. I wouldn't cover more than 50% of the surface with holes. Just about 30% is all you need for it to work right.
I've got a guy on my Patreon who I believe is pretty adamant about buying your speakers because he's building a home theater. He lives in California.
That's a great idea.
Nice.
He mentions it all the time to me. So if somebody wants to get your speakers, is it like you got to go there, or can they just purchase them from you, or is it like does it come with you? Does it have to come with you in order to pick it up?
No, we're open for business. I stand at the corner. We'll sell speakers for money. That's an interesting question, actually. So what sets us apart on Grimani Systems? And again, I don't have time to go into it, or else I'll be here all day, and I got to fly to a meeting tonight. So what sets us apart is this insistence on really even dispersion. So this thing that I mentioned that Floyd Toole figured out, speakers with an even dispersion are good. We take that to like an obsessive extreme. And the way we found to get there is to design a special waveguide that takes the mids and highs of a transducer that's actually either pointed up or down and splays them into a waveguide so that they're forced to be wide. We're not just relying on the membrane trying to disperse. We're actually saying, I don't care what you're doing. We're just going to force you to be plus and minus 70 degrees this way and plus and minus about 30 degrees this way. Then that's crossed over digitally to the woofer with really steep filters and a proper time alignment so that there's no uncertainty on how that all works. And then we're using amplifiers that are this really efficient super class D amplifier that sounds great and is incredibly dynamic. And so we can actually make a speaker that's like only about this deep, like 4 inches deep by about that big, that's driven by about 250 watts each, that will light up a 600 square foot room at sound pressure levels. You're like, I can't believe there's that much sound coming out of that little thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say I can't believe it's because we've all been used to, that amount of sound pressure level comes from a box much bigger. Yeah, but that box much bigger was built with all these older technologies that didn't have the right amps, all this other stuff. So we just kind of like knocked over all these precepts of how speakers are designed, basically brought them into the 21st century. The amps are all networked. Being networked, I can actually go and dial into any amp from any of our clients. If they want a quality assurance, I can check and see how you doing. Are you hot? Are you cold? Are you connected? What's up? So it's very, very modern thinking. But wait, there's more. You can just buy the speaker with its amp. Speakers are all active. They come with amps, and done. Or you could have us involved in the consulting of the design, the construction, the acoustical treatment, and the calibration of the room. It's up to you to choose that. So if you get us involved in the whole thing, you really are getting essentially the best value out of it, because not only are you getting what is ostensibly a really nice speaker. Again, I'm not going to say the best speaker in the world, whatever. It's a good speaker. As a commodity, it's a great ingredient to cook a beautiful meal. But then what you also get, if you want, is the top chefs coming over to look at your space, figure out acoustically what it needs, optically what it needs, where the seats should be, what the screen should be, what the projection should be, all this stuff, including sound isolation, noise control, electrical feed, anything you want. And then you end up with a really good ingredient that's placed in a wonderful room we'll even come out and do 2 or 3 site inspections during construction to make sure everything is being done by the plan. And today I was doing that on a project about what should have been an hour and a half from here, and it took me 2 to 2.5 hours to get back, a site inspection. And I get there and the plan was well done, and it was like, wait a minute, this is different than the plan. What happened? Oh, well, the structural engineer asked us to change that. Yeah, but that completely changes the acoustics of the room. Okay, let's find a solution. So you can get that. And then the really important ingredient is, in the end, we can come in and tune the room, actually calibrate everything, make sure everything's hooked up correctly, and then tune all the equalization, the time domain, the frequency domain, to where the thing is awesome. Awesome. I just did that for a client near here, actually in not even a dedicated theater. It was what I call a media lounge, an open floor space. And when I all got done, I gave him a demo, and he sat there like this, literally. Hey, Peter, you okay? I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, what do you mean? I thought it was going to sound good. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I'm dumbfounded. It's like, yeah, that's what we do, man. So you don't have to buy the whole package. You can get the speakers, go do it, tune it yourself, have a good time. Or you can get parts of the package, the full package, whatever you want.
Nice. Carl, this question was for you. Okay. Make him happy. What else let's take like one or two more there, Jordan. Because you got to fly out, right?
I got to go.
Yeah, okay.
You got to fly out, Anthony. Yeah, so let's stay on for about 7 more minutes. If you have super chats, we will prioritize those. Okay. Let me find one. Let's see, good one.
We need to have a come back just for an AMA instead of.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. What's the recommendation? What's the recommendation for the rear wall if MLP is quite close to it, apart from move the main listening position?
Move the MLP. That's a thing we deal with all the time. So thanks. That's a great question. So ideally, you don't want to be sitting with your back to the back wall. Okay, that's just, and I'm assuming, the rear wall. So ideally, you don't want to do that for actually a few reasons. One of them is that's where the bass is going to pile up. It's going to get louder bass. Wait until you have 4 subwoofers tuned in the room. If the 4 subwoofers are tuned, you can actually get to a point where the difference between the bass in the middle of the room and I'd say about 2 feet from the back wall doesn't change so much. So you can do it. 2, you ideally, in the ideal listening room, the distance from the front speakers to you is about the same to the distance from the side speakers and the back speakers. So you're in the middle of this sphere of speakers, right? So that everything's arriving at your head from all these directions. And in fact, nobody ever does that. There's very little case where you could actually build a space where everything is equidistant to you. Our chief engineer designed that at a local recording studio. It's called the Garden Room, where the room was actually a rectangular room, but he built the interior to look circular and spherical, and all the speakers were equal distance. So once you're on the back wall, you're really close to the back speakers. And how do you make that sound tonally balanced to the front speakers that are now, 12, 13, 14 feet away, 4 meters away from you? How do you do that? It's hard. So some of the trickery is try to move forward as much as you can. So don't put the seating position directly against the back wall. Even if you can move it forward 6 inches, there's some gain. If you can move it 10 to 12 inches, there's even more gain. And I worked on projects where it's like, we're not moving that couch. Okay. So now what do you got to deal with? So first, the bass, you got to deal with it. You got to use multiple subwoofers to tune out that normal bass pressure that's on the back wall. Number two, what do you do with those back speakers? If they're on the wall, they're firing over your head. So choose a speaker that's actually aimed down. We make a speaker called the Rixos W, in which the waveguide is actually aimed at an angle so that it's hitting you, even though it's back over here, it's aiming down at a slight angle, so you're hearing it. And then tune it to where it's not too present. What the hell does that mean? Well, what you're going to notice when it's closer to you is it's mid-range energy. All the stuff is going to be very like tapping you on the head. But if you suck out a little bit of the upper mid, if you do some things to make it sound less present, the same feeling you get from it being further away, and if you put some diffusion around that speaker, so you put things around to scatter the sound, you could cheat it. You could cheat it. It's a cheat. But you can cheat it to where it doesn't sound like, man, there's a speaker right over here hitting me on the back of the head. That's about what I can do. I hope that answered your question. It's not ideal. It's done all the time. There you go.
All right, last question. Sorry, guys. We don't want to keep Anthony too long for his flight, but how close to the screen should the LCR be when placed behind a woven screen?
That's a great question. And I always want to lead like, how did you even hear that there is an issue? So let me go back. In the beginning, the screens were woven. Actually, in the early days in the 30s, what was actually hung was a big sheet. Then it got to perforated vinyl because it was more consistent from a picture point of view. And the regular cinema perf actually introduced a low frequency, basically blocked the high frequencies somewhere around 2 to 3 kilohertz. And you compensated for it by turning it up, put a big horn behind that can take it. And then came in micro perf, small holes closer together. I worked on that with Stewart, including a bunch of other companies. And on those, you needed at least 6 inches of space so that the frequency at which there starts to be a reflection didn't create a bounce back and forth that made the speaker sound nasally. Then came woven screens. And woven screens are a lot more acoustically transparent. And you can actually get as close as and there's different types of woven screens, but the typical ones from the main manufacturers, you can come as close as 2 inches from the screen without really hearing a change in the timbre of the speaker. You may lose a little bit of high frequency, which you can compensate with some high frequency boost, just a tiny bit. But that timbre error that comes from this little reflection is irrecoverable. And usually you can get to within 2 or 3 inches and it's fine. But wait, there's more. If you use a speaker with a waveguide like ours, and you look at its view up from the side, oh man, I don't know if I have that. Hold on, let me see if I can actually quickly pull up. Oh, there we go. Let me show you that diagram here. I always like pictures. Present. Share screen, go to screen 1. All right, can you confirm that you can see this? Yeah. So this is a side view of our waveguide. Okay, this is what's in all of our speakers, and we're not the only ones doing this kind of thing. Okay, this is our Rixos L standing for large. Okay, all of our speakers have this funny waveguide in it, and this is a side view of it, where the tweeter on this particular one, this is a version where the tweeter's on the bottom. Some of them have a tweeter on the top, and the tweeter's essentially going in transversely in the energy. Well, if you put a screen right here on this flat surface, the bounce of the energy is going to hit a curved surface. It's not going to come back to the screen. It's going to bounce somewhere else. So it essentially diffracts away the bounce. So with these kinds of speakers, you can get even closer. You can get to within an inch and not hear any problem at all. Mm-hmm. So we're doing this. There's other manufacturers that have horns and waveguides on their speakers, including Pro Audio Techno. I always like to give credit to other people. We're not the only people doing good stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. But I'll mention Pro Audio Technology. I'll mention some of the stuff from JBL. I'll mention some of the stuff from Klipsch. You know, anything that's got a horn in which the tweeter is not on a flat baffle where the sound's going to bounce back and forth, but instead it's back in there with a surface that's either curved or angled. The sound bounce is going to hit that thing and won't come back with a comb filter from all the bounce back and forth. So that's the answer to that. You could go, you know, by the time you're 2 inches away, who cares? But if you needed to get closer, a product with a waveguide or a horn, you can really get very, very close, and you're not going to hear an effect from the screen, from the woven screen.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Well,
thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thank you for the questions, everybody. Sorry we weren't able to answer all of them. We know that Anthony's on a time crunch, and we want to respect his time. He's a busy man. So, hey, man, it's good. Always good talking to you. We're definitely going to have you come back multiple times to talk about, you know, other stuff and maybe like a Ask Me Anything or something like that. But appreciate you coming on and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us, Anthony.
No, you're welcome, Jordan and Shane. This was fun. I can't believe we've been talking for 2 hours.
I know.
I hope
it went by like that.
All of you guys listening aren't like, will he just ever shut up? I'm shutting up now. Thank you. I guess if you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to our website. It's called, the easiest way to do it is Grimani.tv, like it's written right there, Grimani.tv, or for the acoustic treatments is sonatususa.com. Both of those have a contact info sheet where you can reach out, and believe it or not, we'll actually answer. Hey.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, Shane, what you want to close out with? You got anything good coming up?
JVC 900 coming up. Got some Dolly speakers, and that's about it for now.
Cool. Yeah, I've got BenQ projector review that I need to work on this week. Just got in the Sony Bravia 8 projector, which you've also reviewed. So, yeah, you guys stay tuned to our channels. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. And go check out, Anthony Grimani's site and Sonitis. And we will see you guys in the next video.
Thank you.
For watching.
Bye.